because this was the position you played most in. We've talked before about what involves that position, but why don't you tell the listeners sort of what playing that position particularly involves, playing in the second row, playing on the edge of the pack?
Yeah, so I played mostly in the second row, but sometimes at loose forward or even in the three quarters and a few games at prop, but mainly second row. And the position now is so different than it was 25 years ago. I think it's changed enormously. And I think the relationship between second row and prop has changed quite a lot as well. When I was looking back on a lot of the international sides from 25 years ago, there's so many of the top props first played in the second row. I'm not sure that relationship would work as well now in the modern game. We've got some examples of it, but I think if you're a prop, you're now a middle, aren't you? And you just play for 20 minutes a half normally. Where going back then, you would be playing pretty much 80 minutes because you only had two subs, tended to be a forward and a back, and you were expected to play 80 minutes. Therefore, the back row had a slightly different role to the prop. They tended to be a middle similar to what props are today, and they would tend to be a little quicker. They were normally a bit faster, and the props would take the early drives, and then the ball would be spun out through the halves, and often the back row then would try and attack on the fringes on the edge between the defending pack in the middle and the three quarters, and that's where the sort of attack. If the games were, if you're coming across a big pack, often what the teams would do, and I've got some examples of this that I've noted down, is particularly internationally, they'd pick another prop in the second row because they wanted some bigger guys in the middle. I'm not sure you could do that now, could you? Because the second row position, sort of, I call it an inside centre, because they sit in the zonal. They're almost just sat inside the centre, and you're either on the left or the right, and you defend zonally and you attack zonally. You used to be able to drift wherever you wanted across the pitch, looking for gaps as a second row. So if you were asked, if a prop had to go off injured, you were asked to step up, your gameplay wouldn't change that much 25 years ago. You may be dragged to do a few more carries or drives, as we used to call them. Tend to call them carries now. But I think the difference was easier then. I think it's the difference between the prop and the second row is vastly different now in terms of how you play the game. Because when it's zonally, when you defend zonally, you've got to be able to read the play a lot more. It's a different way of reading the play. In your day, you're talking about kind of your second row forwards were basically your quick hard men. so you would be going looking for work in the middle of the pitch rather than the play coming to you in your sort of channel, in your zone. So now you're talking about the modern second row forward who kind of has to read things from a channel and a zone most of the time, and they don't tend to go travelling around the pitch as much looking for work. Yeah, exactly. They don't seem to drift around as much. So they couldn't say, for the next 10 minutes, it's really tough. I'll just hang about in the middle and take some pressure off the props who are doing 80 minutes. You're only doing 20 minutes. You do twice as much work in that 20, and it's left to the props. So, yeah, very often in the back row, you would some games you'd pretty much play like a prop. In some games, or as the game wore on and defence is tired, you start to drift out a little bit more. You let the bigger guys do some of the donkey work in the middle, and your faster second rowers would tend to try and drift and look for a gap and just pop up where they might see a gap.
It's interesting, yeah, because you said most of a lot of the players who would play in the second row earlier in the career are sort of a stepping stone to becoming a prop. The other players you'd see, especially in those international sides of say 20 to 25 years ago, is you'd see a second loose forward playing in the second row, wouldn't you? So you'd have Sculthorpe and Farrell on the same pitch, one in 12, one in 13, or what have you, and so that's how you would have. So you'd have Morley as one second row and Sculthorpe as the other, say, or Farrell as the other, and so you've got effectively you've got five middles on the pitch. Two of them are your ball playing middles, and three of them are your hard hitting middles. Kind of.
Yeah,
Whereas now, it's a very, like you say, it's moved into this athletic inside centre role, like you talk about, where it's about hitting lines and about reading the play. And explain what the sort of reading they have to do then, in defence in particular.
Well, when you're zonal, the difficulty is you'll have to be counting players. I mean, we never did any of that. Now you're having to count players and make sure you've got the right number of defenders on the right side of the pitch. And if you find yourself short of players in defence, you've got to shoot and stop the ball trying to be an overlap and get into the winger. So once one person shoots, everyone's got to shoot. You can't have one person shoot and the rest hang back. So, knowing when to shoot, when not to shoot, trying to read the players next to you, you need to understand their game really well. You need to know if you can get to the player to clamp the ball as they catch it so they don't get the pass out. You need to know whether to shift one to the left or one to the right if we're moving across with the play. There's a lot to think about. There's a lot to consider. Where they have the full-back looping round the back, that makes it very difficult when you're zonally defending, because you've got one eye on that full-back who's looping. You think, well, are they going to come down my channel? Is that my guy, or am I taking the front runner? Often you'll see someone drift with the fullback and they give it the front runner and they get it a split second. You haven't got much time to change your footing and trying to defend against that front runner. So it's much harder if you're just defending in the middle, or if you're just sort of roaming round as we used to, really. You just pick a space and say, right, I'll defend this space. If they go out wide, that's someone else's problem. When I played, the drifting defence started to come in. We started to do crunch up the defence a little bit and drift to the right or the left if the ball went that way, to try and give yourself an extra defender. That started to come in. I heard people talk about zonal, but I never really got it then. I think it took a while to come in properly, and now it's almost all zonal, isn't it? That's how it appears to me anyway.
Yeah. Fair enough. So we talked about some of the qualities there. That's really interesting insight from someone who's played the position and obviously pays a more technical eye to the game than the average fan like me and Sarah. Even though we understand the positions, but not. I don't think we've used terms like zonally and reading like that, Sarah, would we necessarily? Probably
not. No. Although it was interesting what you were saying, because it's something we've often commented on, that at Hull, the second rower seems to go missing, so we end up with an overlap because of the second rower not being where they should be. So, like you were saying about the reading of it as being interesting. Yeah.
And does that play into the fact that Radford likes really old players, so he's picking people who came through in the original system that David was talking about?
Possibly, yeah.
Maybe so, but that's an interesting point, sir, really, because what a good attacking team will look to do is tie up some defenders. If you know where someone defends and you can tie them up, if you can read the game and you know the person who's made the tackle who's now getting off the floor is supposed to be on the left channel, you're more likely to know where those gaps might appear.
Yeah.
And the attacking teams will have that philosophy. They'll know where they want to attack. They'll have defenders they want to tie up in a tackle before they attack a certain part of the pitch. It's so advanced. I'm using some terms like zonal because that makes sense to me. The coaches probably use different terms. It's probably far more advanced than I'm making it, actually. This is just how I read it now, and I could see, you can often see two tackles before what they're trying to do. So often they do the inside pass. You see that so often, and hear a lot of fans say, well, what are they doing that for? They've never made a gap yet. They've never made a break with that inside pass. But that's to tie in those defenders. You're making those defenders come back onto their right or their left to catch them on the heels, and you're just dragging them little bit.
The role of the second row often is to take what everyone says, turns around to the person sat next to him and says, what's he throwing that hospital pass for? But it's like you say, now with the way that the fullback sweeps around the back or what have you, the lines that the teams run, that's what it's there for. It's to make that centre and half-back opposite step in.
Yes, yeah.
And then make a gap. And often, that's one of the other things what I love about the second rowers is they take those really hard to take passes. They take the hospital balls and hammer away at it, and sometimes they might get the benefit of it when the match opens up later on. Sarah, when we decided we were talking about second rowers this week, in the sort of hosts group chat that we have, that we kind of loosely talk about what we're going to do on the show occasionally. We talked about a couple of players, but one player in particular who kind of is a lot of what David was saying before about second rowers seem to maybe become a prop at later stage or go into a different position, and it was Jamie Peacock. And it's very interesting to look at Jamie Peacock's career, isn't it? Because he started as a back row forward, then in his last year at Bradford and his first year at Leeds, so probably halfway through his career, maybe 7 years into his career, he started to play sometimes in the front row, sometimes in the back row, and kind of merged with that. And then the back half of his career, the last 7 years or so of his career at Leeds, he was a front rower. So we put a poll out, because we couldn't decide between ourselves, could we, Sarah? So what did you think of him as Jamie Peacock?
I think a front rower, but yeah. I'm really he's one of those that I do think of him in both camps, really. Yeah, and Alan, being a Bradford fan, was straight away, oh no, to me is a back rower, and Tim said the same, back rower, and I always think of him as a front rower, predominantly as a front rower, although I remember him playing internationally a lot in the second row. That was when we would fill our pack with, I always thought we just filled our pack with big guys, but now what David's explaining maybe puts a different view on that. But actually, if you look at his English league career, he played 246 times in the front row and 195 times in the second row. Internationally, it was kind of flipped around: 15 times in the front row, 24 times in the back row, and then obviously there was a number of bench appearances as well where he might have come on in either or. But so we put the poll out there basically to see whether we talk about Jamie Peacock in detail this week, or if we talk about him in detail when we talk about prop forwards. Turns out, Sarah, any notes you've written about Jamie Peacock, we don't need to worry about this week, because 70% of people think he's a front rower and 30% of people think he's a back rower. So turns out he's a front 70% rower. Of people agree with us and 30% are wrong. It seems like 30% agree with Alan, yeah. Which, like you say, is just shows Alan's not the man of the people that I thought he was.
I would say it was both. I really would. If you look at his early career, he was a natural back rower. He was a lot slighter. He was very quick. His fitness levels were exceptional. He was a fantastic natural back rower at that time. But his game developed as he got a little older. He got more powerful. Maybe his fitness and his speed went a little bit, and he developed into an exceptional front rower.
No, because he was a 70-80 minute front rower, wasn't he? He wasn't a 20-minute front rower. He wasn't spelled as much as a lot of other front rowers in the game are.
Yeah, true. That's very true. But I still think he developed his game, the style he played, doing more yardage in the middle.
And the game changed around him maybe a little bit as well, which suited him being in the middle. So we'll talk about Peacock more the legend that he is. We'll talk about him more when we talk about prop forwards in a future show. So let's start going through some of the views that we've had in first of all, before we talk about our own list of players. But maybe some of our own players might come out of this one. So Sarah, what did Lee Whitnell got in touch to say?
So Lee Whitnell said, Ben Curry has, when fit, been the best at wire in my time. My favourite in all time in Super League was Gareth Ellis and John Bateman. I think it's between Bateman and Wade Graham for the best in the world right now, in my opinion.
So a few names there to touch on. Ben Curry, he's that exact prototype of the modern day second rower. He's more comfortable switching from the second row to the centre than he is from the second row to the middle, and he's very quick, he's very skillful, he's a fantastic player.
Yep. Interesting that he mentions Gareth Ellis, because out of all the forward positions, second row is the one that I would think of him being least. So I view him as a loose forward or a prop forward, not a second rower.
Yeah, and I think that's another example of someone as they get older in their career, isn't it? Moving position, because I think of Gareth Ellis in his prime. He played a bit of loose forward back then
and
as well.
Actually, he started off as a centre at Leeds and Wakefield, didn't he?
Yeah, he did. I think of him as a second rower. I mean, in Australia, he only played in the second row for the Tigers
Right,
after
so
being
yeah,
so
yeah.
great at Leeds in the second row. I think of him as a really, really good offloading second rower who